being a historian, beyond being a historian, I'm also a genealogist. So I help people
Okay.
research their family histories. I help them
Hmm.
to kind of discover local history, figure out, the actual narrative of the history of their towns. And so
Well, that's
uh,
cool.
day in, day out, it's pretty standard fare of working through books and microfilm and
Hmm.
trying to make sure that um, people get their facts straight because a lot of times people will say, "Oh, well, great grandma said that this happened," and
Hmm.
it is you know absolutely provable that the thing in question did not happen because it was never recorded, it was never talked about, it was never something um, that happened. So
So you offer
it
your legal consultation
not
frequently then?
not necessarily legal
No?
consultation, but giving people the proofs to make sure that if they are going to make a legal claim,
Hmm.
that they have the proof to back it up.
I got you. I got you. Well, that's
Yeah,
good, man. That's awesome.
yeah,
That bring in a nice little side income for you.
yeah. It definitely brings in some good stuff. So
Good. Good.
yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. All right. We are recording. If my picture goes away, don't be surprised. It's because we were more concerned with your face, not mine. So,
No worries.
with that being said, I'll go ahead and start our formal interview here. I know we didn't have a lot that was like prepared, but I wanted
Hmm.
this to kind of be open and you can just take a stab at whatever angles you want to with this. I know you mentioned a couple of the local examples there. All right. And I'm going to welcome local historian. Let me say that again. I'm going to welcome local historian Allen Burr from Princeton, Indiana. Alan, you've done a little research on this thing called the tri-state tornado and specifically how it's impacted the town of Princeton and the surrounding area. So with that,
Absolutely.
um, looking back at a storm from 100 years ago, there's obviously a lot of obstacles involved to get the story right. But in your time of research, what are some of the things that has stuck out to you? And maybe we start with the importance of why we should make sure that we remember this moment in history 100 years ago.
Absolutely. Uh, One of the major things whenever considering the storm is this was
Mhm.
in a time before the advent of early warning systems. And so this town and many of the communities that were along this storm's track were absolutely devastated because they had no warning aside from the visual cues. And even back then, visual cues weren't particularly helpful for a lot of these people because they were just trying to go about their daily lives. It looks like a normal, severe weather outbreak. People can withstand that. People can weather that. But a storm of this absolute magnitude was unprecedented and is still unprecedented. It is the worst storm of its kind in U.S. history. It still holds that title. And so, whenever considering communities like mine, people just need that early warning. They need to be able to prepare. And at that time, they could not. Now, it is certainly, we're certainly not the hardest hit community. There were other communities like Murfreesboro that lost orders of magnitude more people than we did. We had about 200 injured, and we lost about 20 people. And we mourn the loss of those people. Even still, I mean, that's something that we're looking at doing on the anniversary is having a memorial service for those people. But whenever we're looking at the people who lost their lives, it could have been much worse for Princeton. Whenever we were doing oral histories back in 2006 with some of the people who survived, one of the people who we interviewed, her name was Marie Carnahan. She was talking about, one of the reasons why people didn't see greater loss in our community was because it was a Wednesday, and for Wednesdays in Princeton, there were always sales going on in our town square, and a lot of the people who would have been, you know, either killed outright or severely wounded by this storm were actually uptown on our square shopping. And it's the little moments like that that really um, give people an increased chance of survivability.
Yeah.
And sometimes having that early warning system in place is just one more way for people to have that extra moment.
Right. Right. And it's you and I talked a little bit off air, but another story that comes to mind is a lady from Murfreesboro, and she had lost her, or she had gotten up to look out the window because she heard this rumbling, this big storm or something that was coming. Her teacher told her to sit back down,
Yeah.
and she was going back to her seat when she forgot her compact, she said, and she went back, grabbed the compact, and then everything hit. And she was one of the few survivors. Now, no telling had she survived had she followed her teacher's instructions. But little moments like that make all the difference.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the biggest takeaway that I think that I have through all of my research is, you know, what early warning systems can really do for people. It gives people those extra moments to be able to prepare and to take shelter and to, make the necessary arrangements. But whenever we're looking at this storm hit our community um, around 4:15 p.m. And that everybody was pretty well doing their business, but whenever it hit, it completely demolished two major industries in our town. It ripped through a school building and it left it pretty well as a shell of itself. It hit a school called Baldwin Heights, and it basically tore a straight path from Baldwin Heights down to the Heinz ketchup factory and demolished it. And it basically kept going. And it's interesting whenever you look at how Princeton was laid out at that time, because there were two of the major industries um, basically right next to each other, because you had the Heinz factory, and then basically maybe a quarter mile down the road you had Southern Railway Shops, and Southern Railway Shops was absolutely demolished. It was torn down. There were walls that had collapsed on top of people. Railway cars were flipped off of the tracks. Some of them were crumpled. The entirety of the glass that basically surrounded one of the buildings was completely shattered. And so that's really, I mean, whenever you're looking at it from a local history perspective, those are the images that really stick out for our local people.
Right.
Because the Heinz factory is no longer there. Baldwin Heights is no longer there. But we still have some of the buildings from Southern Railway Shops, and they stand as a testament to not only, you know, the storm itself, but how a community can rebuild. One of the interesting things about Baldwin Heights, so Baldwin Heights was an active school for a long time, and this storm hit on March 18th. And what's I think is most impressive about the efforts that went into rebuilding the community is that the school in less than a month was able to reopen for its students after basically being demolished and made a shell of itself. It was reopened and made available to its students again. And I think that really, stands as a testament to the resiliency of a lot of small communities like this.
They were tough. They had to be tough back then. They didn't
Absolutely.
have as much help, like you said. Obviously, when it comes to pre-warning, there was none. I think that a lot of people can be very thankful because they were just more attuned to the weather back then, as usually agricultural communities are, people that work outside. I think that more people were attuned.
Yeah.
Something's a little off about this one. Maybe we'll go inside. And we heard a lot of those stories from Murfreesboro. Okay, kids, I know it's recess time, but things aren't looking too great outside today. Let's just come on in. Let's
Yeah.
come on in. They didn't really know what, but they got sort of in place. And then, of course, by the time they really realized either they had adequate shelter or they did not, unfortunately. But it's interesting. You're talking about relics from 100 years ago, but this is just one town of many. I mean, Think about this thing was on the ground changing community after community, whether it was in, the Boot Hill of Missouri or whether it was through Southern Illinois. So many towns that were hit. You mentioned Murfreesboro, DeSoto, West Frankfort lost over 100 people as well. And it's just, it's hard to imagine that magnitude of destruction over a 219-mile path that appears to be continuous, which is really quite remarkable.
Yeah,
Okay, so big anniversary coming up for the town. We've got some events coming up next year. And I'm not sure if we're going to be able to use this information, but hey, since we're here, do you want to go ahead and elaborate on some of the things that Princeton has planned for the week of the anniversary?
absolutely, absolutely. So we're starting off our week by inviting the Evansville Museum Chief Curator Tom Lomberg to come and talk about the resilience of people living through tragedy.
Mm,
And that night, we're actually having the renowned author Angela Mason come in and give a talk on her book Death Rides the Sky. That's
mm,
at 6 p.m. We're really, really excited to have her. The next day is going to be March 18th. That's the
yeah.
anniversary date. We have my predecessor, Benita Johnson, who's going to be giving the local history perspective on the events of the tornado, talking about
Mm,
how it impacted Gibson County, starting at 10 a.m. And then we have one of the newer authors to the scene of the 1925 tornado kind of landscape. Justin Harder will
mm.
be coming in and talking. And then on Wednesday, I myself am going to be getting up and giving a presentation on curating historical narratives, talking about how historians use news clippings and oral histories and different artifacts to put together a story.
Mhm.
And then we're really hoping that you'll be able to join us yourself there, Jeremy, on that Wednesday night. And
Well,
then
thank you.
we're hoping that you're going to be able to make it. We look
That's the
forward to
plan.
it.
Yeah.
And then on Thursday, we're going to
Mhm.
wrap up the week with Christine Wilgos from the National Weather Service in Paducah. She's the early warning coordinator over
Mhm.
there. And she's going to be talking about basically the advent of the early warning system and how it continues to save lives today.
Yeah.
And then we're going to end the week strong by having a religious memorial service for those who lost their lives. So
Good.
it's a jam-packed week for
Yeah.
us, especially being a moderately sized library. But we
Mhm.
are very much looking forward to that week and to commemorating
Yeah.
this historic storm.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I mean, it's a beyond once in a lifetime. This is 100-year storm. Don't know if you'll ever see anything. Hopefully, we don't see anything like this again.
Yeah,
You can't imagine 700 people being taken by a single vortex. But that happened 100 years ago. As you mentioned, we got a lot of things in our favor. And during the course of the work that I'm working on, we're going to be talking about the technology differences for sure.
yeah,
But it doesn't safeguard us because these type of storms happen. And even though we're more likely to be aware of their presence and we're more likely to know when the conditions are coming together, that's still no guarantees. Just
right.
look at some of the recent tornado activity. Look at how many lives that were lost during the December 2021 rampage from that quad state,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Although I think technically it didn't go through all four, it did lift. It looked like briefly in Tennessee, so it wasn't technically on the ground through four states. But that storm alone, EF4, killed so many people, even though they knew it was coming. And the reason is because people sometimes just don't have time to get adequate protection. So information is key. You always got to know, where you're going to go. With that being said, final thoughts on this and what has Princeton done to prepare for the next one? And how do we make sure that there's not a worse emergency next time a powerful EF5 comes to town?
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, for preparedness, I think that our mayor and our emergency management team here in Princeton has done a really, really amazing job of making sure that number one, our storm sirens work. Basically, anytime that you talk to somebody who's from the Midwest, they always
Mhm.
have a set day where the storm sirens get tested. And for us, that's every Friday at noon.
Right.
And it's just kind of a staple
Hmm.
for how we do things. But people on the ground here are also making sure that we're getting better educated day by day on how best to prepare for storms, whether that's through meteorologists like yourself
Mhm.
and others in our community who are trying their best to educate people, or through programming like we're doing here at the library, where we're going to be not only talking about this storm, but how we can better prepare for storms like this and even storms lesser than this going into the future. And so those are kind of the staples for what we're doing. And really, just as last thoughts, I mean, it's a historic storm for sure. 100 years ago, this storm absolutely decimated our town. But it wasn't just our town that was affected. Our our neighbors, um, just outside of our county in Griffin, their town was completely demolished. And even after they had started to put things back together, they were, you know, continuously facing issues. And I think the important lesson to learn from our ancestors back in that time period is no matter how hard our communities are hit, it banding together and supporting one another has to be a has to be a priority. It has to be a priority. Whenever something like this happens, we have to uh, lift each other up, work together, and rebuild. No matter what kind of tragedy befalls us. I mean, natural disasters like this can hit at a moment's notice, and so it's important that whenever we are suffering through something like this, that we don't overlook the importance of showing kindness and helping our
Yeah.
neighbors.
Yeah, and that can't be overstated. So I'm really glad you said that. I'll mention a work I did last year on the 50th anniversary of the 1974 super outbreak, and I that story was focused on the town of Brandenburg. And time and time again, when I'm interviewing these eyewitnesses, and they were talking about, well, there was a before and after Brandenburg, always has and always will be. There's always that moment in time, and he was describing the type of atmosphere that a small town was going through back in the mid 1970s. But he talked about being a small town and kind of secluded a little bit from the rest of the world. There was a lot of infighting,
Yeah,
a lot of neighbor after neighbor, and just a lot of gossip and a lot of. He said after that storm hit, man, no, everybody put every difference aside, and the community was never more together than in the wake of that horrible, horrible tragedy.
yeah.
So, well, wonderful. You know what, Alan, you mentioned at the very beginning, and I didn't take you full screen, but do you remember some of the things you were talking about at the very beginning of this interview?
Uh, Not off the top of my head, but I mean, I'm
We
sure
were
if
talking about the
we.
magnitude and what it
Oh,
means. What I'd like to do, if you could just maybe go back into that for a moment, because I didn't have you on full screen. I thought some of that stuff was really good.
we're talking about the storm being
Yeah,
orders
so
of
I set
magnitude.
you up and I said basically I introduced you. Local historian Allen Burr from Princeton. We've been doing a little study on this 100-year storm. What are the big takeaways?
It, really, this storm was orders of magnitude more powerful than anything that we have ever seen. It's a storm that really cannot be forgotten. It completely destroyed half of the town of Princeton. But even though that happened, I mean, there was so much resiliency with our people, and so much of a spirit of working together to rebuild the community. But even though our town was hit so hard, it cannot be overlooked or understated that our town, yeah, we lost a lot of people, but we didn't lose as many people as some of the other towns. I mean, Murfreesboro lost orders of magnitude more people than we did. Um, we had 20 people who lost their lives, 200 injured, and that's just a fraction, a drop in the bucket of what this storm did to the communities in its path. It you know decimated community after community on along this 200-mile path, and even after it got through Illinois, where it did the majority of its damage, whenever it grazed past Carmi, Illinois, crossed over into Indiana and demolished the city of Griffin, which is one of our very close neighbors, a community that we're connected with and fond of. But then it came up into Gibson County, and it even though it grazed Owensville, which is still within Gibson, it killed 19 people, 7 of which were in the same family. And so,
Hmm.
this storm
Terrible.
was absolutely horrendous. And I don't think there's a storm that we've ever seen like it. I mean, even in recent memory, um, the one that sticks out in my mind was the tornado that hit Joplin, Missouri.
Yeah.
And that one still didn't reach the same level.
No, fortunately, fortunately,
Yeah.
tragedy on the scale of what we saw on March 18th, 2025. Excuse me, 20 or 1925. Let me get my years straight. Good grief. But no, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad I did that. Yeah, I'm not sure if we're going to use that for the actual piece, but I thought it was a good bite. So thank you for that. Any other final thoughts that you have here today, Alan?
I think I've pretty well covered
Good.
what I have, and so I appreciate the opportunity to
Yeah.
come on and talk with you about this.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I do look forward to going out to Princeton on the 19th and to talk about the findings during my process of putting this documentary together. And I look forward to meeting you in person. In the meantime, this actual interview will be posted, if you don't mind, to my website in addition to whatever content we may use for the film.
Absolutely,
Okay, my friend. Well, thank you so much. And
absolutely,
Alan, you got my number, right?
I do, I
All
do,
right,
I do.
hold on for just a second. Let's see.